All right, everybody. I am very excited for this event, for us being able to host this with our friends at Crossbeam. Let's dive right in. I am very excited to start off with this panel about the state of partnerships in Europe. And we thought a lot about like who to get onto this session. And I think we've got a couple of people here that can provide really valuable insights from their point of view as investors, operators, founders, and just partners, consultants to great companies in tech space, expanding to Europe, building partnerships in Europe. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to Andrew. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks so much, Rob. Hi, everyone. So I'm the founder of several product and services-based tech startups. I'm now leading, as is stated here, Get There, who guide early stage and established SaaS vendors and SIs also to get match fit for growth. Key, of course, obviously a tenet to this whole session is helping these companies shape and realize profitable partnerships with enterprise vendors in Europe and other regions that you'll all be familiar with, like Salesforce.
Dimitar, do you want to go next?
Sure, yes. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me here as well. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dimitar Stanimirov. I'm the General Manager for EMEA at Crossbeam, which I'd like to think in this context needs no introduction. But to keep it short and brief, we run the largest partnership ecosystem in the world with 12,000 plus companies now on the ecosystem and rapidly growing. And I'll turn over to David, I guess.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Dimitar. So it's great to be here, guys. My name is David. I'm one of the two partners at a firm called Angular Ventures. We're a first check investor, B2B companies, deep tech companies across the UK, Europe, and Israel. Now, I also happen to be an investor in Superglue, which is an example of how much I love and am passionate about partnerships. But my background before Angular, I think, is much more relevant to the conversation here today. Prior to Angular, I was the first growth hire at Airtable and actually led our growth team and partnerships organization, built that up. And one of the things I also worked on was our European, broader EMEA strategy, which was heavily based on partnership play. So really excited to be here and happy to kind of share some of those thoughts.
I'll be very frank. We have David on our board, and there are times when I feel like he's definitely the more competent person when it comes to the strategic vision, the insights when it comes to partnerships. So very, very happy to have you here, David, and join us in the session.
Excited to see you.
Yeah, just a quick intro. I, before founding Superglue, founded a company in the MarTech space. We grew and scaled that company through partnerships. 70% of the revenue of that company is still driven by partners. 50% of leads come from partners, and of course, very, very Europe-centric with that business. So I learned a lot of lessons, how what to do and especially what not to do. I think we made a lot of mistakes, but we figured it out. And I think Europe is a very, very appealing, attractive market when it comes to partnerships. But like Isaac said in the beginning, it's a different market. So what we're going to try to do today, we're going to share insights, observations. We're going to highlight opportunities, and like I said, there are quite a few, and maybe a couple of practical ways how to think about this. Very glad we got Dimitar on here because he might have some data for us. But overall, I think the four of us have literally seen hundreds of companies in the partnering in Europe, figuring stuff out, and we're going to share those insights and the conclusions we've come to. So let's dive right in. We've got two people in this call that are based out of London. And, this is, I posted this on LinkedIn. I said, this is, I posted this image and said, this is not a Brexit post. But what's interesting is what I see happening quite a lot is that people, they open a London office and they consider that their European expansion. I think that's quite a misunderstanding. European diversity can't be understated, right? Like this is a big topic, and Dimitar, maybe I hand over to you. In our preparations, you talked a lot about go-to-market and how go-to-market and building ecosystems in Europe are. There are a lot of similarities and how companies, make it in Europe. What steps to take to come into this market?
Yeah, sure. So obviously the session here is kind of focused on the differences between the two markets. But I'd like to point out, as you said, Rob, that there's luckily a lot of similarities between partnerships, ecosystems in the US and across EMEA. And so I thought of starters there. So all the data that I'll share with everyone today comes from our State of the Partnership Ecosystem survey that we run annually across the Crossbeam ecosystem. So we literally asked hundreds of partnership professionals a plethora of different questions, and we were able to draw some interesting similarities and differences between the US and the broader European region. So I'll start with the similarities. I think this is probably an easier one to kind of kick things off, and then we can go into the differences. So obvious things in terms of team structure. I guess partnership programs look very similar across the pond as they do in the US. So channel partnership programs and tech integrations are still the focus for most partner teams. So if you kind of look at the US and broader region and the EU, 68% of European companies have some sort of channel partnership program, and 77% have that in the US. And when it comes to tech integrations, the numbers are again quite close: 63% in the US Europe versus 74 in EMEA. Reporting lines are more or less identical. So most partner teams tend to report directly into the sales org. So no surprise here. The numbers again are pretty much identical, circa 50% in both geos. And then the second most common reporting line, 25%, again, pretty much identical, of partnership teams report directly to the CEO, which is very interesting. Team sizes also very similar. Unfortunately, partnership teams are still fairly small. So most people who took the survey are part of teams that are anywhere from 5 to 2 individuals, about 45% in Europe and 43% in the US. Where we tend to see bigger differences across the two ecosystems is when you kind of have larger teams, 10 plus people. The gap is a little bit more significant here. So 28% in Europe versus 40% in the US, which kind of shows a little bit more mature ecosystem. Coolidge is another interesting one to look at, especially when it comes to CRMs. No surprises here. Salesforce.com reigns supreme. 74% of partnership teams in the US use Salesforce. 58% of partnership teams in Europe use Salesforce. The second most popular CRM is HubSpot. Again, probably no surprises here. What I personally found quite surprising is that there are more partnership teams in Europe using HubSpot, 25% versus 21% in the US. And again, this one should be no surprises. The biggest gap between CRM usage for partnership teams, US versus EMEA, is Pipedrive. So 10% of partnership teams in Europe use Pipedrive versus only 2% in the US. I'll kind of stop here and take stock, turn over to Rob, Andrew, and David, and see where we go.
Yeah, thank you so much for the data. Let's talk a bit about the UK, and the UK is a kind of launching, like a first step to get to Europe. Andrew, do you want to talk about that? I think you're actually British, right? I keep forgetting because you're always all over the place. He's in New York right now.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, and thanks, Dimitar. Very insightful there. Yes, I'd like to give a shout out to the UK government, of course, referencing Rob's previous point about Brexit. But though aside from that, the way I tended to view Europe is very much like a patchwork quilt. So it's clearly, as we'll go into, very diverse, but all on largely the same landmass. But you've got all these discrete cultures, business norms, and so forth. And we've got a great session coming up after ours today. It's really important, however, that clearly location, where you're going to strike matters. And certainly, Rob, just picked up on your point there. The UK is always seen as a sort of an easy target if we lump it in with Europe still. And clearly, language, the ways of doing business, and obviously a very mature, established market that's a great place to be working in. But Europe in and of itself presents massive opportunity. And so oftentimes it can be very easy just to make the assumption of let's just land in the UK and expand. But clearly, as everybody on this call and others will know, that it's going to really depend upon what your proposition is and where it's going to be best fit. So if I take the example of management and a particular feature, you can then say, well, actually, it might make sense if we're coming from the US to expand into Europe to then look at where the financial centers are based. So that may be, in this case, London, therefore UK, and perhaps Frankfurt, therefore Germany. And that's where we then begin that journey. But of course, everybody's going to be different. There are, of course, also those vendors that will then treat Europe in different ways. So, for example, my team and I are partnering with vendors that are purely focused, say, in the DACH region, or they're focused on Nordics as an entry point before they then expand further. But it shouldn't be underestimated that clearly if you do start, be hyper-focused around that geographic location, and as we'll go into the kind of the use case, and I'll touch on that later as well, before you then broaden out from that initial point.
You know what's really interesting? What I think what people underestimate is the competitiveness of anything you do in the UK. Everybody that's coming from the US usually goes to the UK first. Obviously, less language barriers, etc. But at the same time, everybody, like if you talk to European tech companies where they think about US expansion, they go to the UK first. It's like both geographic kind of regions considered as a stepping stone. So everybody meets in the UK, everybody competes in the UK. So I think it's a very interesting thing to think about. Does that make sense for you? And are there opportunities in other markets? But I think, David, you can actually talk to that, right? With when you went to Europe with Airtable, you went to the UK first, right? You opened the London office.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, we did take that approach. I think that one thing I would clarify is that, we went to the UK in terms of, actually building the first office, and some of our initial hiring. But from a go-to-market perspective, right, the go-to-market strategy it wasn't just we're launching in the UK and then it wasn't land and expand, as you said, Rob, right? Like launch in the UK and then the rest of Europe will happen. I think something we realized really quickly is that, there are some markets where you can be based in the UK and you can sell into them and it'll work. Most of the markets, that's not the case. Most of the markets you need to hire locally, and hiring locally is challenging. And it's also a big risk as a company that is kind of testing the waters, figuring out what the strategy is. So a lot of our go-to-market experimentation was actually partner driven, because local partners, right? Like a partner based in the Nordics, or a partner based in Germany, a partner based in France, they were able to help us figure out, are we ready to go to market? Are we ready to go to market in France? Are we ready to hire somebody a local who speaks French and has local relationships and can actually drive a top-down sales-led process, or do we still need to tweak things? And partners ended up being we very much had early stages. We had a partner-led go-to-market because they were our trusted advisors locally, right? They helped us understand, do we have product market fit within this geography yet? Or do we need to change things? All of that stuff, all of that early experimentation, we were able to do much more quickly because we partnered with local channel partners, consultants, that kind of thing.
I would love to talk just for a second, talk about actually hiring and people, experienced people in Europe. I think we don't have that legacy, right? Like people haven't done this for 2 decades or however long. So that's one of the challenges I saw quite a lot, especially in Germany. I mean, how difficult is it to hire strong partnership teams? Or let's say there are awesome people. Like what I mean is people who have done this 2 or 3 times, like in the US, right? You have these experienced partnership leads that have some form of playbook and they're kind of redoing it. And I feel like in Europe, again, at least that was always my challenge. I hadn't done it. I didn't know a lot of people that had done this before. I wish I knew a lot of people that are in these upcoming panels who have that background, but I always felt that it was a lot more challenging to get people on board who understand the value of partnerships.
Yeah.
I'll just say quickly, it's as you asked that question, it's funny. I think back on how we approached it, and we didn't actually make any partner hires locally, right? Like everybody was US based, and the folks we hired that were local were customer facing, right? But we just kind of I don't even think we considered hiring local partner folks, which is not great. Like that's totally a blind spot. I think we missed out on that.
Rob,
Andrew?
I've got
Yeah.
I was just going to jump in with another data point, which very much supports what you were poking around, which is the fact that we don't necessarily have established leadership partnership teams in Europe. I think that's changing, but I'll give you that piece of data, which I think supports it quite nicely. So if you kind of look at partnership experience, years of partnership experience across the board, EU versus Europe, what we find out is that about 50% of folks in Europe have less than 5 years of partnership experience versus 60, almost 70% in the US who have 10 plus years. And where in particular, going back to your point, where we see the biggest gap is, I guess, what you would describe as leadership level, which is 15 plus years of experience, where in Europe only you're looking at about 16% of our partnership professionals, and in the US, that is almost 25. And this is very much, by the way, reflected in the average salaries that are paid in the US versus Europe. So we can go into that if you want to, or leave it here.
I love that point. I think it's very important, and it shows kind of the need. And I think, by the way, it's a huge opportunity. So whenever I hired partner managers or hired people to turn them into partner managers, that's what I told them. I was like, this is a huge opportunity. Being in partnerships in Europe and the lack of people who have done this for 10, 20 years creates massive opportunities to for career growth. I think, the mindset needs to change, right? The C-suite very often in Europe isn't there yet, right? Like the whole ecosystem mindset, the platform mindset, etc. But I think we're getting there. And I always tell people, like, if you're thinking to get any kind of function and think about your career, get into partnerships. This is even more true in Europe.
I think to pick up and Rob and David, in fact, in particular, to pick up on the point about sort of hiring, that it certainly pays to be very, very careful and I would say respectful of the markets that you intend to be operating in. And that will mean finding that right balance, or striking the right balance between clearly if you are coming from somewhere like the US, where you've got greater knowledge of your offering of a market that's more established in that respect, and then combining that then with that local talent that you can hire, who are going to be boots on the ground, have the connections, understand the culture and the ways of doing business in these discrete markets.
Andrew, like, how important is that? Having somebody who speaks the language, who's been in that, like, how would you, for your experience, like, what's so important? Somebody who knows the culture, or somebody who's done it before? There's
a tough one to answer that, because we're very fortunate that English is a common business language, so that certainly goes a long way, but it only goes so far, of course. And I always remember as a rookie being in, I think it was the Netherlands, actually, in Amsterdam, actually about 25 years ago, and sitting and negotiating a deal with a software company I was with. We're all speaking English, and at the very last minute, my host switched to Dutch, and of course you're sitting back going, "What the hell happened here?" But it is, I would say, imperative that if you're going to make a commitment to it, to find that right blend. I'm not saying you should enforce by just having local, because clearly there is an attractiveness to having people that are experienced elsewhere, which adds further value to the conversation. But finding that right balance is something, I would say, in my opinion, for certain markets, going to be key. So, and then there are certainly those markets that will, coming back to the point of respect, that will really appreciate and latch onto the fact that you're making that commitment by having a local individual from that country.
I think that's a good point, right? Having somebody who is like sending a signal, right? We're committing to this market. We're committing to these people. We have local experience. So let's talk about, David, I think
I was just going to say, I mean, it's, it's interesting. Well, I actually have a question for folks here. How important do you think, building as a partner, leader building a network of channel partners, consultants, SIs, RSIs, right? Like the whole list. How important is building that network and kind of bringing that network with you? And because I'm thinking back to the days at Airtable, if we could have hired somebody who just knew all of the right people in Germany, because for us, we had to go outbound. Like we didn't know who the right partners were. We had to go figure it out, and so I'm just thinking, I feel like building that network and coming with that network could be hugely valuable too, but curious what you guys think. Even more so in Europe, I think.
I think this is a really interesting point, and I'll hand it over to Andrew in a minute. But so one thing that we saw, so we started out building our ecosystem. You can tell that I'm originally from Germany, but we started in Germany, and we were in a marketing automation. We had a MarTech solution, or have a MarTech solution with that business, and we partnered with marketing automation players. What's interesting, that if you look at the top 5 marketing automation players in Germany, only one is in the top 5 in the US as well. And one of the advantages we had is we partnered with people that our competitors that were US based didn't even know, right? Like we, for example, partnered with one company that marketing automation platform that just serves the DACH market, just serves retail, but works with all the top retailers. And building a relationship with them was a huge advantage. And this kind of plays into this slide. It was incredibly hard as well in the beginning, right? It's like in Europe, you have to initially overcome this. Why should I partner? It's not like in the US where everybody partners kind of with everybody. So you have to, we worked for 1 year to get on board with them, build an integration. But once we were in, it changed, right? We didn't have to compete with a bunch of other players that had a partnership. We were the only ones in our space, and they basically shut the door behind us, which was a huge opportunity in terms of being successful. And I think to some extent, you can bring your network. At the same time, I think starting from scratch and figuring stuff out and figuring out the nuances is really important. And we only have 2 minutes left. There's so much stuff to say. I'll hand over to Andrew, actually, to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And I mean, just being mindful of time, I think certainly SI partners can be a fantastic way of really sort of, I say short-circuiting, but certainly accelerating your path to success. If we consider also sort of how each country buys, there are certainly more markets that are going to be more reliant if your product offering plays into that. So certainly if you've got something that's not quite plug and play, but certainly requires the implementation, that's a great channel. And clearly they will have those relationships. If we also think about it in terms of the buyer, then they will be leaning on those consultants as trusted advisors. So again, if you pick the right partner, you can really accelerate that. But I think in terms of closing it out, to think about how your value of what you do translates to each of those markets you want to sell to.
Couple of final words, Dimitar, and then we we hand over to the next session where we get a lot more practical.
Yes, I would reserve it for Andrew and David. I think I took a lot of time at the beginning. But again, I think we have a huge opportunity ahead of us. Going back to this point about the gap in experience, I think the tides are rapidly changing, and I think there's more and more homegrown talent that can really push the ecosystem forward. So onwards and upwards, I say.
Love it. Yeah. I would say with that, let's close it out. And like the guys said at Partner Hacker, right, Jared and Isaac, we need more of these sessions.